Hello. In the Crown of Aragon, 639 years ago, it was March 12th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico. And this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today's document was a Latin toughie. Yeah, this one is in Joan's register, the Secret Seal register, and it is to the Pope. So Joan is writing to the Pope, and we've just been through a whole bunch of correspondence from both Joan and Violante and their 3-year-old child to the Pope. And so, not that many days have passed since our last correspondence to the Pope, and yet it seems like from this letter, Joan is displeased with the Pope. I mean, maybe Joan is just like in a mood, because we had him expressing his fury at the governor of Aragon, and maybe he's starting to notice that people are maybe not taking him as seriously as he might have hoped when imagining what it would be like to be king. I'm not sure, because the tone in the Latin is, of course, going to be really difficult to ascertain, because the meaning in the Latin is difficult to ascertain. And then another factor is that when I first looked at this letter, I didn't really feel like it was going to be a difficult one paleographically, but it turned out to have a lot of very difficult paleographical ticks, like a lot of the C's look like T's, and the N's are sometimes maybe not N's but CI combinations. So this particular letter is presenting difficulties, and I spent a lot of time on it in addition to working through the LLM output. I did some hand transcribing, entered that into Claude's interface during the reconciliation phase, but yeah, it still turned out to be pretty cryptic and also paleographically very challenging in a lot of parts. So, it's a little rough trying to figure out whether Joan is frustrated with the Pope. Claude thinks so, but I just want to sound a note of caution that we can't necessarily conclude that, although there are some indicators. So we'll get into that. And then also, I just want to give a little preview for something we're going to do at the end of the episode, which is we're going to look at the letters that come before and after, because they each have interesting bits. So you're going to get 3 for the price of 1 in today's episode, maybe as a way of me making up for how I don't really know what the document of the day is about. I can't even tell what it's about. Well, we do have the sourcing information. We know that it's the Pope that is being addressed. We do have an update about a topic that came up a little while ago. So you might remember from some earlier episodes, oh gosh, I don't even know which ones, but on the webpage for this episode, I'll put in a link. I'll figure that out. So earlier episodes, we had, I think it was Joan, it might have been also Violante, who were trying to get the Pope and the College of Cardinals to admit their family member in Valencia, James, the Bishop of Valencia, to the College of Cardinals, to have him become a cardinal. And we do see that here in this letter. It seems to have happened, because in line 5 of the letter, which is the one at the bottom of folio 24V, there's a little punctuation slash after what looks like TIOR, which is, I think, the suffix or the second half of the word that came before. Well, there's a punctuation slash, and then there's nunc, which means now. NUNC. The horizontal line, the Macron abbreviation mark, is standing in for the second N in the word nunc. So, nunc cardinali. That is saying now a cardinal. And then we've got, after that, tunc vero episcopus Valenciunius. I have no idea what, or is it Valencianonem? I don't know, but it is, I think, the genitive for Valencia, and tunc means at that time or then. So what the next phrase is saying is essentially like earlier, or at the other earlier time, he was the Bishop of Valencia. So it's clear that there has been a success, that James, the Bishop of Valencia, was admitted into cardinalship. I want to say the College of Cardinals, but honestly, I don't know enough about how the College of Cardinals works, or like what that institution is, to say that he became part of it. I would assume and guess that all of the cardinals are part of the College of Cardinals, but that is something I do not know. So if all cardinals are part of the College of Cardinals, then good old James of Valencia is in there. But if there are some cardinals that are not part of the College of Cardinals, then we don't know. But we do know that he did become a cardinal. So there's been a success. So why is it that there's a possibility that Joan is grumpy with the Pope? That hinges on the last word in the first line, but also how the letter starts. So it's got the addressee, Sanctissime Patriae, Most Holy Father. And then it says, Dudum iteratis. And that phrase means something like, a while ago we repeated, or it's actually like a passive participle, and so it's something like having repeated a while ago, but that's not quite right. It's something about how there was a repetition a while ago, and what this is all setting up is what's on the second line, the letters that were presented to the Pope from us, the royal we. Okay, so that much is clear that this is a reiteration of letters that came before. But that's not all, because the last word of the first line, which is the one that hinges this interpretation for tone, that last word, quadruplicatis, quadruplicate. So 4. It's been done 4 times. So it's like, I mean, I kind of, if you are writing to somebody and you start out your letter, or like even let's make it current day, like you're sending a DM to somebody, a text message, yeah, and you say something at the beginning like, "This is the 4th time I am asking you." I think it's very difficult to interpret that as just a friendly reminder. Because if you're stating that basically, you've already approached that person on this topic 4 times, it's really, I think revealing that you're frustrated. And also it raises this question of, do you think this is going to result in the outcome you desire? Because if you have to ask a 5th time for something, it probably means the person is not going to be doing it. But I guess Joan is like, well, maybe the 5th time is the charm for this thing that he's asking for. What is he asking for in this letter? We don't know. And when I say we, I am including, it's not the royal we, it's the me plus the large language models. I am really trying to find the nouns in this letter that will help to unlock what it is that Joan is trying to get, and it's taking 5 times for him to get it. But it's been rough in terms of even finding that information. And I have already put in about an hour and a half working on this Latin document. And so I think I'm just going to have to pause on the mystery of, because you might not even find it, because a lot of times when they're writing these letters, they're just referring to it vaguely, right? We've seen that again and again. These affairs, or that earlier request, or whatever. So maybe we'll find a letter from Violante that helps to clarify what it is that Joan is asking for a 5th time. All right. So, quite dissatisfying with the document of today, but in order to make us feel better about that, I've got a couple little gems from the surrounding letters on these folios. So the first letter on folio 24V, the letter above the one we're talking about, is to another count, and I'm not quite sure who this is. Joan identifies this person as a nébot, so the letter starts Comte car nébot, and that means nephew. So Joan is writing to someone who he identifies as his nephew. If it's someone from his side of the family, it probably has to be one of the 2 sons of his half-sister, Joanna, who was the daughter of Pere in his first marriage before Joan's mother. So it could be them. It could also be someone on Violante's side. And there is an addressee line, and I'm going to try to track down a little bit more about who is being identified there in that addressee line. I don't recognize it right away. It says Compti Her Miniaki and then et conventiarum. So that even looks like something that's not a place name. So I'm going to have to dig a little bit for that. But the reason that I brought this up, I wanted to talk about this letter. There's a little gem in it. I mean, most of it is just talking about he was just saying, I hope everything is good with you. He does refer in the middle of it to his accident, his misfortune, and calls it a disponitio de nostra persona. So he is his person, his, which I think means his body, was in this state of being, undisposed, or not quite sure exactly how to translate that. And also the paleography is a little hard to make out exactly what word it is, but nothing super revelatory. But then in the third to last line, he is asking this person, his nephew, to send him some belles libraires de Bretagne. And I think, let's see, then he says, a serva cosa de que molt nos complaurets. So I think he is asking in that second half for maybe a servant that the person he's sending this to is well recommended. But the libraires de Bretagne, so these are dogs. Libraires are like hunting dogs. So he wants some beautiful or very good belles libraires. So he wants some beautiful dogs of, I think that's Brittany. Britannia, I think, would be Brittany and not like Great Britain, but not 100% sure about that. So that's a little jet. So this is Joan's passion for hunting dogs. So we saw it in an earlier letter from sort of the beginning of the podcast, whereas his father is dying, he asks his brother to secure for him a bunch of Pear's stuff, and one of those things is a particular hunting dog. And now we've got another reference to Joan seeking out some really great hunting dogs from Britannia. So that's exciting. The other thing that I wanted to point out is in the letter that follows the document of today that I wasn't quite able to get as far in as I would like. So on 25R, the letter that begins in the second half of the folio is to an interesting correspondent. So the beginning of it reads Don Johann, etc. So that's just him stating himself. So this letter does not begin in the first couple words with the addressee. We've seen this before where Violante will start her letter with La Reina or her titles or something like that. So it's really interesting how you can have that option where, like in the document of today, the first words are the addressee. And now in this document that we're about to go deeper into, the first names that appear are the sender. So, okay. So the addressee comes after the word al. So we have Don Johann, etc., meaning all his titles. And then we have a capital A and then L for all. And what this then says is al muy noble e muy honrado Don Mohammed, Fio de Abul Hagig is what's there, but I think that would be Abdul Haziz. We had Shadow piping in there just a moment ago. All right, so then after Abdul Aziz, we have the phrase Fio de Ismael, Fio de Nazar. So this whole string of son of, son of, son of. And then we have Rey de Granada, de Malaga, del Maria, de Quadish, de Roda, de Basta, de Gibraltar, de Kepra, I think is Keps, not quite sure, and de Todos, and then we have an abbreviation that I cannot quite make out, and then one more place name that looks something like Dininos. So anyway, Joan has listed out all of the names in the lineage of Muhammad, the current king of Granada, and then he, after that, lists out all of the realms that are the territories under the kingdom of Granada. And then he goes on to talk about how, they want to be friends, but there's been depredations with certain merchant shipments. And this is a common thing. And this actually is going to be again and again a topic that Joan and actually Violante get into with the King of Granada, where there's very regular, I wouldn't say it's happening like every day. It's like a few times a year there are merchant shipments that get seized by groups groups of Muslims in ports in Granada. And so in those situations, and there's one in particular that I've studied a little bit more in depth, there's basically a ransom demand, or they're just taking all the stuff. And in the example that I have looked at from a few years down the line, what ends up happening is that the merchant who was the financier of one of these ships that got captured by a group of Muslims in one of the ports of Granada, he goes to Joan and says, help me to arrange for the ransom of the crew and the products. And as the correspondence continues, basically the King of Granada tells Joan, sorry, all of the crew members of that ship have converted to Islam now. And so it's a really interesting moment in the story of interfaith encounter on the Iberian Peninsula, and this idea that you could end up having people converting to Islam. It could have been like a cover story, like maybe they didn't all convert to Islam, but just the fact that the King of Granada says that that's what happened is reflective of how that is a plausible fate for the group of sailors, merchant sailors that had been captured. So all of this is to say that the shipments that were going around the Mediterranean, and when I say around, remember, all of these boats were very close to the shores, almost. All their routes were close to the shores because it was safer. They were vulnerable to capture. So Christians would capture Muslim ships, Muslims would capture Christian ships, and there was an economy of ransom in the Mediterranean in the Middle Ages. And there's a really great article on that I'll put a link to in the webpage for today's episode. But that is part of the explanation for why at the bottom of this folio, Joan starts to talk about the transportation that happens in the zones between the countries. So they also share a border, so there's like land transportation too. But I think that what's being referred to here are the at times very troublesome piracy actions that characterize the way that people in the merchant realm had to kind of contend with as they were doing their journeys of trading goods and so forth. All right, so we got a bunch of different things. This document about the relations between the Crown of Aragon and Granada was also sent on March 12th. So we have definitely a 2-for-1 situation here. And then the letter about the dogs from Britannia, that was from March 11th. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I have done my job. Because remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's documents and additional show notes. And listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.